Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So I have a little bit of a paradox here. In order to explain what I mean by that, I want you to do a thought exercise with me that you've probably done before. If you haven't, it's a really powerful thought exercise. Just imagine you are the last person on Earth. There's no more people. All the people have been vacated somehow. Either they died or got taken off by aliens, or for whatever reason, you're the only human being on the entire planet. Now, if you've done this thought exercise before, you start to realize that a lot of the things that you value right now would be meaningless without other people around, right? Money would immediately have no purpose or use for you. It'd be little green pieces of paper or digits on a computer screen. Even like gold bars that are like hard metal, valuable metals would have no value. I mean, what are you going to do with them? I guess they're beautiful. They might have a limited value of like decoration for you, but you couldn't buy or sell using them. There's no inherent value to trade anything with it. And everything else, like you could just walk into any sports car dealership and drive off with any sports car you wanted. You could basically have any resource you wanted as long as you could facilitate that resource, right? The energy to run that resource you could have available to you and no one would get in your way. You were the most powerful person on the planet in a way because you have no limitations. But you also are the weakest person on the planet because you have no other people to augment your strength or your abilities. And so you find yourself in this very interesting place. And if you've ever done this thought exercise, you probably run it to its conclusions and you'd assume that you'd find yourself to be very lonely, isolated, maybe depressed and sad that there's nobody else around you. And I think this is a valuable thought exercise to do on a regular basis. Now, my paradox is a couple episodes ago, I made the comment that you should bet on yourself. You should bet on yourself. Don't bet on outside systems. Don't bet on other people. And then in this episode, I'm leading us through a thought exercise where all we have is ourselves. Like the conditions for you to bet on yourselves are 100%. That's the only person on the planet you could bet on in that scenario. And weirdly enough, I think a life where you are 100% the only person to bet on, you don't have a choice. You have to in order to survive. There's nothing else to bet on. In that scenario, we find ourselves depressed, sad, lonely, without purpose. So are we the subject as individuals moving through the world? Individually, we bet on ourselves, and it's all about how we're going to navigate the space. And at the end of our lives, like I mentioned in a couple podcasts ago, we're the only people that can measure the value of what we did or didn't do or the goodness or badness. Or are we social creatures? Are we objects that interface with other objects, other people in the world? And these other people bring meaning to our life and strength in numbers and leverage and things that we do. And in fact, the striving to be impressive to other people or to generate resource or to make things have meaning in that system, that is the purpose and plan of life. It almost feels like they're two opposing ideas. And so that's where my paradox comes from.
I love a good paradox. I love a paradox because I love that the answer is always both. That's the answer. The answer is that we are both at our best when we are betting on ourselves and when we are resourcing ourselves and listening to our inner wisdom and listening to discrete voices and when we have faith in our ability to become the person we need to be in order to manifest the life we want, right, over time. And without other people, we have no meaning. Right? Other people help us create meaning. And so there actually isn't a contradiction between betting on ourselves and needing other people in our life. There's no actual contradiction. And I don't even know if it's a complete paradox. I'm not even sure if it's one of those, even though I love a good paradox. But I think part of betting on ourselves is having the resources that we need in order to accomplish what we want to accomplish, in order to become the best version of ourselves or to go down the right road. We talked about betting on yourself and we talked about having good maps. And I would argue good traveling companions is another key to taking the action we need to take in order to make change in our lives. That support structure, those people in our lives that nourish us and refresh us and do all of those things that allow us to get through to the next day and also provide the meaning for us to even want to. I think all of that is crucial, and I don't think there's any contradiction in there.
I think there is a tension point between the two, but this episode is dedicated more to the tribe and toward people. And I think you're absolutely right, Antonia. It is both. And so I use the word paradox to create a framework for us to have this conversation, really, and look for that tension point between self and others, between subject and object.
Yeah.
And I would say most of us do not cultivate or curate the tribe that will honor us the best. We often just take the default. I mean, if you rewind the clock a couple hundred years, most people lived in a small village. They weren't, before the Industrial Revolution, let's say. They lived in a small village. Maybe they lived in a city like London or, a big city somewhere. But the majority of humans lived in small groupings of people. And there weren't airplanes and trains and all these transportations. There weren't instant communication devices, right? And you go back far enough, there wasn't even the printed word. You'd handwrite stuff and send messages. So you had a default of the people you spent time around. You probably were going to partner with a person in your village. You probably were going to have children with that person. Your children could grow up in that village. Your grandparents, great-grandparents, go back generations, probably grew up in that village, unless there was some massive traumatic event, like some other village, came and burned your property to the ground and stole you and took you somewhere else. You're probably going to live where your ancestors lived, and your children and grandchildren will live where you're going to live before technology. This is how it was. We defaulted to the people around us. And then with the advent of technology and transportation, we realized, oh, wait, we can curate tribes. We can cultivate tribes of people. And yet, in a lot of ways, we're still living in default settings. Now, it might not be default by geography. I think it's default by ideology. I think in our new modern technological world, it's not the physical village you're born into. It's the ideological village you're born into that creates your defaults for you. And so I think it's actually, back in the day, it was both, right? Where you were born probably was your ideology a lot. But now it's ideological in that it's so reinforced. It seems like it's so ubiquitous. It seems like there's bigger coalitions than ever. You could just explain away, well, 150 people in my tribe believe this thing, but I think a little differently. What if it's 150 million people that believe this thing in an ideology? That's hard to break away from. And so we just find ourselves in these default ideologies, living our days around the people that kind of believe and think the same way as us. Sometimes they're our family and friends that we were born into and around, and sometimes they're new people we've cultivated. I don't know how much intention we're putting to that as people. I think the way the world is going and all the trauma that seems to be increasing by the day tells me that we're not doing a very good job at cultivating the types of people that will help us think and feel the best way we can think and feel for the best version of ourselves.
I suspect that part of the reason why we're doing this is because we have not evolved to be able to handle that many human interactions. Our human connections max out at a certain point, the ability to sort of track people. I think it maxes out at 1,500 or something. We just can't handle all the humans that are being thrown at us all the time. And so I suspect that we are sorting ourselves into ideological tribes because that's manageable. And it's almost like we're looking for archetypes or patterns of human beings in order to manage the complexity of all the human interaction that that is available to us at this time. But that is a bit of an ancillary issue. I think what it is that we are really trying to navigate around is, as you said, we are programmed or pre-programmed to default to a tribe, right? Whether that be something that is geographical, right? And the younger we are, the more likely it is to be geographical, or whether or not it's something that is ideological. And that's, I believe, why, you mentioned almost facetiously that there was a paradox, and you're like, well, I was actually just using that as a launching pad for the conversation, that there is a tension point between these two things, and they're both equally important. I think that's the reason why there is no contradiction there, because when we default to a tribe or when we default to a group of people, I don't think we're necessarily betting on ourselves. I think we're betting on them. I think we're hoping that these people that surround us, just through time and circumstance, are going to be the people who will take care of us. And that's why we default to them, because they're familiar, because they're something that we know. And we're betting on the familiar to be what gets us through life. We're back to that place of uncertainty, not thinking that we will have the inner wisdom, we will have the capacity to navigate through something that is out of our comfort zone. And so we default to what is comfortable, whether that's a online tribe of people who think exactly like us and we're in an echo chamber, or whether or not that is a group of people that are surrounding us and have our whole lives with our families. We do tend to default because we're hoping the familiar will get us through.
I think defaulting and surrendering in to the tribe is one of the most selfish things somebody could do. I think betting on yourself is actually not selfish at all. It seems like that, right? Everybody tells you, no, buy into this, default into this framework. Whatever it is, I don't care what the framework is. It's very selfish of them to ask you to do that. And it's very selfish of you to choose that, meaning you're choosing your own safety, comfort, security over living your true authentic self, over living the thing that makes sense to you, over living what works for your life or what actually creates harmony in your existence. Like you're choosing a selfish move instead of the brave move, which is bet on yourself, curate the tribe that will be the tribe that will have your back, truly have your back, the true you, right? It's a selfless act to say, you know what? I'm going to let the weirdness, the oddballity, because you're probably a weirdo if you're listening to us right now. Like you're probably weird like us. You probably think a little different. You probably have a little bit out of the mainstream viewpoints. You probably want to live your life a different way, right? And by going ahead and doing that, sending the signal out, hey, I'm brave enough. I'm not going to be selfish and hide away in my default. I'm going to be brave enough. I'm going to be selfless enough to let this show, let this light shine to the world. Other people like you are going to see that and go, wow, I should be brave too. You're going to inspire them to connect with you. They're going to be humming at the same vibrational energy you're humming at. They're going to be interested in the same things you're interested in, attuned to the same thought patterns, the same energy cycles, the same emotions you're attuned to. And maybe they'll have a different perspective. Let's hope they have a different perspective. Let's hope they bring richness and variance into your life. You don't want them to be exactly the same, but you do want to share interests and values with the people you hang around, not be in opposition to them, not be selfish and be hiding from your true self and the people that could truly resonate with you. Like you're hiding your light and being selfish when other people could benefit from that weird part of you, that expressive part of you, that unique part of you to shine through. So I want to encourage people, I think listening, especially you listening right now, don't be selfish and just go with the default. Be selfless. Be brave enough to showcase who you really are.
Well, and that's an actual paradox. The actual paradox is that doing for yourself and betting on yourself and going the direction that helps you become the best version of yourself is the selfless move. It requires, like you mentioned, a lot of bravery, and it requires overcoming a lot of obstacles and being willing to go through a path of uncertainty, being willing to get out of your comfort zone. And because of all the, sort of the crucible in which you are forged when you make those choices, when you overcome those obstacles and are able to build the self-confidence that comes from that, then you have a lot more to offer. You have a lot more to offer the world. And it ends up becoming a selfless act. It ends up becoming, you're the who couldn't benefit from the best versions of everyone. If everybody was the best version of themselves, we'd be in like Star Trek world at this point.
Yeah.
And so that's the weird paradox. The weird paradox is betting on yourself actually is an act of selflessness, ultimately. And I think while you're betting on yourself, I think that choosing to be conscientious and aware and have discretion around the tribe you surround yourself with, I think that is part of what is required to forge yourself into that person. So there's an old adage that you are the median of the 5 people that you spend the most time around. So if you start looking at your acquaintances and the people that you spend a lot of time around, well, what are their limiting beliefs? What is their worldview? What is the template life that they're living? What are their characteristics? What are their values, right? What is not just interest, but their values? Are they people who are growth oriented? Are they people who really want to move the needle and become the best versions of themselves? Will they push through and become disciplined and do hard things? And are they making that selfless choice? And if the answer is no, then you might have a node in the system for why you might be hitting some sort of glass ceiling, why you aren't able to advance to where you in your mind wish you were. Because that's one of the big challenges we run into, is that we have a fantasy in our head of who we were meant to be. And in fact, I've heard so many people say, I know I was meant for something big, but I'm afraid. And I think a lot of times the reason why they're afraid is they're afraid that if they really head down that path, the person that they fantasized that they were supposed to be will never materialize because it was a fantasy. And they'd rather hold on to the fantasy than to manifest the reality of the best version of themselves. So there's a lot of reasons that people unconsciously sabotage themselves and hold themselves back. And one of the sort of virtues, or the most virtuous reasons to hold yourself back, is that you're trying to stay loyal to the people in your life. And they are creating a crabs in a bucket scenario where every time you try to crawl your way out, they just kind of grab you and pull you back down. And you don't want to be disloyal to these people. And so I think it's one of those very difficult situations a person can find themselves in, which is using the people in their life as a rationalization for not going for who they know they could be or they wished they could be, when it's really just a justification to not even head that direction and try to not have their fantasy shattered. It gets real complex real quick, but it's almost like we're using the people in our life to not have to try. And I suspect that this dynamic happens more often than we like to admit. So it's important to reevaluate where you're at, where you want to be, and whether or not the people in your life are cheerleading or facilitating that. Now, I will make this comment. We did say early on that people default to the people in their life. Oh, by the way, I just have to point something out. In the last podcast, you used the word aptitudinal.
That's right.
And in this podcast,
it's a new word now.
You use the word oddballity, which is just as fabulous. So I'm writing it down. I'm actually keeping track on this piece of paper of the words that you are inventing as we go in the series, and it's actually pretty awesome.
You listening know your oddballity. You have oddballities, right? I do.
I don't think it sounds right, Joel. All right, so back on track, away from me pointing out some of these fabulous words, even if they sound a little wrong. I think going back to the original point, which was this idea of defaulting, I also, as somebody who does not have a relationship with their family, right? There's a couple people in my family that I have some connection to, but for the most part, on both sides, right? My mom's side of the family, my dad's side of the family, and my immediate family. I don't have much of a relationship. And I can feel the lack. I can feel it. Even though the majority of people in my family, extended family and immediate family, do not share my values and interests, they don't see eye to eye with me, I know that there is something nourishing about family, regardless of whether or not you are, on the same page. And part of the reason why I'm separated from some members of my family who probably would have some communication with me is that they're not cheerleading me. They don't really have any faith in me as a person. You know that phrase, it's a biblical phrase, and I think we've said it before, that a prophet is without honor in their hometown. Not that I'm a prophet, but I definitely have sort of that relationship with my family where they're like, well, you're the youngest of the family. What could you possibly know? And I'm like, no, actually, I have people who listen to my podcast and think that I'm smart and write things down. And they're like, that can't be true. There's no way. So it is difficult to be around them, even though I feel the lack of it. Yeah. So a part of this defaulting mechanism is to keep relationship with family. That's part of why we do it, is because those relationships, I think, are nourishing as long as people aren't trying to like grab your leg and pull you down in that crabs in a bucket way, or in that completely discrediting you because you're the prophet without honor or whatever. Unless it's a situation where you are being actively undermined, I do believe that family relationships are some of the few that we default to for good reason. I do believe that those are nourishing relationships as long as they are not actively poison, right? The opposite of nourishment is poison. And so if the family you come from is poisonous, well, then I do believe distance is important. But unless they're actively trying to undermine you and the things you're attempting to do, I personally am an advocate for having close relationships to family member, even if they're not, cheerleading you all the way to your destination.
I completely agree. I think family is very important. I don't think I am suggesting, or you are suggesting to you listening, that you should cut out your family or even friends or even your default people. I don't think that's what we're positing here in this message.
No, and to piggyback on that, or even say that said, which is my favorite phrase, that said, one of the toughest components of family members being part of your tribe is that sometimes they have the hardest time allowing you to change. It's hard for our family to see us changing and growing. They want us to stay, I don't even know if it's a certain age or it's just a sense of familiarity for them. I'm not 100% sure why family has the hardest time giving you space to grow. Some families are not like that. If you have a family that gives you plenty of latitude for growth, you won the lottery, you should be on your knees every day thanking the universe, and that's awesome for you, and keep those people as close to you as humanly possible. And most people don't have a family that is cheerleading them to become the best versions of themselves. I still think that relationship to family is important. And I do think a little bit of psychological distance, enough to not over-identify with them and allow their projection of who they want you to be, that becomes too much of a role-person merger. So sociology has this concept called role-person merger, which is when we try to fit the sum total of our identity, who we are, to a specific role, whether that be a role in the family or a role in our career. But we're trying to shoehorn the totality of the human experience into the single role. And sometimes family is the worst context for this to happen, meaning that it's like the most likely to happen. You are a certain role in your family, and they have a very hard time seeing you outside of that role. So if you maintain the relationships with your family that are very nourishing to your soul and spirit, which I think they are, the only word of caution is to not take on what they believe is your role as your identity. It's very critical not to do that. And I would say that no matter what tribe you find yourself in, no matter what group you find yourself in, it's very important to not allow the tribe to assign you a role that you believe you are responsible for filling. Because if you're truly on a growth path, every single role that other people project onto you is going to be a limitation, because you're not a series of roles. You are a person. You are individuated. You are a way for the universe to know itself in a completely unique configuration that has never been and will never be again. So when you think of yourself in that context, it's really silly to think of ourselves shoving ourselves into a role and going, that's me, that's who I am, that's the sum total. So family is the most likely to do it, and any tribe can do it, create a role that we over-identify with. And that's one of the reasons why betting on yourself comes first. You have to have that relationship with self very well established. Not to say that you can't have a tribe or a family while you're figuring that out. Obviously, that's part of, the process as well. But just be really cautious to not allow those roles to be something that overly influences how you're going to create that relationship with self.
We will be right back. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning. We are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker. Now back to the show. That's why I used the word curate earlier, is because I think any tribe you join that's already like really codified and large, like maybe small tribes, like if you join a grouping of people that's already there, you can kind of come into it. But really big tribes or people groups favor ideology and opinion over platforms and principles. And I think that any group of people that favors platforms and principles, when I say platforms, I mean like the platform that everything else rests upon. Like I would say that the United States, maybe up until recent times, has been a platform and principle-based place to live. It's been a giant tribe of 350 million people, basically saying we have the platform of freedom in these ways. We have these principles we live by. Everyone gets to make their choices based on those platforms and principles. So that's like a tribe that I'm a part of. It's a really big tribe, right? It's not really my curated tribe, but it's at least platform and principle focused. And I want to find more tribes like that. I want to find tribes on a smaller scale that are platform and principle focused, not ideology focused, where I got to buy a wholesale ideology to join in. That's craziness, right? Because I don't agree with the entire ideology. I agree with some aspects of it, but I disagree with other aspects. So if it's a principle-based community, it's going to allow for those differences. If it's an ideological-based community, it won't. It roots that out. My old religion was like that, right? It was an ideological, opinionated framework. It didn't allow as a platform or principles for me to have my individual expression or individual life. I had to fit into these templates and these ideologies that were given to me. So I think that's just some maybe ways to think about it on like a bigger abstract term, is like, what people groups are you looking at that are principle-based? And this is why I love type, right? Typology. And I've seen type dip into the other one, right? Or what are ones that are ideology-based? And I've also seen this in type as well. It's like, well, this is how type, we talked about this last episode. Map is not the territory. The type groupings, people that are into personality type, like yourself, like me and Antonia, that are like, this is the way it works. Ideology, opinion, fit yourself to this mold and this ideology of this system. It's a very different framework than saying, hey, this is kind of the platform, the operation system of your mind. This is how you go through the world. We're not going to tell you who you are necessarily, but this is some of the ways you're going to make decisions and learn information. Here's the principles and the platform you can build your life off of. Those are the communities I want to pursue. And the ones that are ideological focused, trying to project a map onto me or other people, I want to avoid. That's my personal opinion. Now, again, I think this is a good advice going forward for you listening as well. I think that you're going to get so much more value out of principle-based communities of people, possibly that you curate yourself rather than just join, over just joining an ideological or curating an ideological grouping of people.
Yeah. I think there should also be a distinction created based on or between ideology and values. So there's a bunch of research that indicates that when you're choosing your life partner, that shared interests and values are more predictive than, say, personality types for a sustainable relationship. And I think that in the modern world, or I would say contemporary world, because we're in a postmodern world, I think that we have conflated values with ideology, as if what we believe is the same as the quality of character that we are. And I think that that's an inappropriate conflation. I have friendships with people all over the map ideologically. I have people who are very far left and very far right that I have relationships with, but we share values. And I'm sure the people on the far left and far right would be totally shocked that I think they have shared values, but they both share values with me. And I could use this in any, I think these are false dichotomies, but any sort of false dichotomy, like, or dichotomist perspective, which is like, religious or a-religious, or, just pick your poison of people who are supposedly diametrically, opposed in ideology. I look for people who share my values, who don't necessarily share my thoughts. And when we talk about finding your tribe, I would argue that finding people that have shared interests and values is incredibly important, way more than ideology. In fact, there's something to be said for only surrounding yourself with people who believe what you believe. You can accidentally and unintentionally invite a lot of bad faith actors into your life because they're matching up with your ideology. They believe what you believe, but they are not necessarily of good character. And so you can unintentionally invite people into your life that are very damaging and harmful just because what they think and what you think line up. So I recommend bifurcating these and no longer conflating them, like see a separation between these two things. On top of that, there was another study that was done in the type world that determined the happiness, satisfaction, and longevity of a partnership was based on the self-awareness of the couples. So there were people who reported what they believed their best fit type was, and then went through a battery of assessments and interviews to determine whether or not they were accurate in their best fit type. And the couples that were closest, maybe like one letter off, mentioned that they had the highest satisfaction with each other. And the people who were wildly inaccurate, or not wildly, but were inaccurate, at least 3 or 4 letters off, were the ones who had the lowest satisfaction in the relationship. And it was a study that was replicated multiple times, right? Quite a few couples, dozens and dozens of them. And I thought that was really interesting. Now, that's not to say that a person who doesn't know what their best fit type is and is on the journey would be disqualified. They would honestly say, I actually don't know yet what my best fit type is. And so they would have a high degree of self-awareness by not knowing, right? By being aware of the fact that they don't know yet. It was people who were firm on it and then ended up being a different type through this battery of assessments and interview series. It was those people who were unaware of their type or had associated with characteristics that they did not actually possess, or at least preferences that they didn't possess. Now, all studies are not necessarily empirically true, but it is fascinating to see that self-awareness was an incredibly high indicator of relationship satisfaction, happiness, and longevity. And the reason why I mentioned that is because shared interests and values and self-awareness, at least in partnerships, are very desirable traits for a person to have. And I would argue that this translates into tribe members as well. So when you're seeking tribe members, and I know when you're older, it's hard to find friends, right? I'm like 45 years old, or almost 45. I guess I'm dating this podcast. But I'm in my mid-40s, and it is difficult to find friendships. And yet when I seek them in places where people have shared interests, values, and high self-awareness, I almost always end up connecting with those people. And I think we should probably go into practical application now.
Yeah. So we talked about the default. We're going to end up defaulting as humans to the people around us, the ideologies around us, the location, whatever. So to build the tribe or to connect with the people that we will connect with that will be good for us, we can support them, they can support us. We have shared values, interests, self-awareness. We're going to have to be very intentional about this. We're going to have to put intention around curating this group of people. It's going to be very rare. There's going to be a group already built that you can just plug into. Although here at Personality Hacker, we're working on some of those things. So you could plug into a group. That's one thing that we are striving for, is to help support that and augment that, because you are probably of like mind, like me and Antonia, if you're listening to this. So we're going to work on that. But in the meantime, one thing you can do is to seek out those values and interests. Find where people that are interested in those things or value those things gather, and then connect with people of like minds.
Well, and now we can do it virtually, which it's kind of interesting that we still tend to default when we have a whole world of human beings to be able to interact with. And I don't think it's a replacement for the real thing. I don't think virtual relationships are a replacement for meet space relationships, right? Like relationships in real life. I do believe there's something to be said for an energy that gets passed between human beings when they are in their physical presence. So I don't think virtual relationships are should ever, if at all possible. Now, there are some people that can't have relationships in real life. And those limitations are, my heart goes out to them. And I think they should make use of virtual space as much as humanly possible to try to get as close to the real thing as they can. And I do believe that you can have very rewarding relationships online. I'm not trying to dog virtual relationships at all. And if at all possible, if you are not in a terrible situation that forces you to only have virtual relationships, if you are in a place at all that you're able to have real life relationships or relationships in the real space, then I highly recommend that. That said, we can make those connections online. We can find them online. We have this extraordinary way of connecting with people all over the globe that have our shared interests and values and also have a high degree of self-awareness, and you can vet that. And I think this opportunity makes it so that it's kind of silly that we still tend to default when we have so much availability through these technologies.
I'm going to be a little more challenging than you, Antonia. If you're incapable of getting to a space with live other humans, get yourself with other humans that share your values and interests. Humans have been able to send people to the moon. They did the math. to send people in the late 1960s to the moon. To the moon. We've sent satellites into space. You can figure out how to take action, meet people online, take action, and get into their physical space. It is not impossible. If we can send people to the moon, you can do this too.
Well, I'm actually, the one person who's bedridden, right?
Okay, maybe. I'm sorry if you're bedridden.
That's what I mean. That's why I was like, the very unfortunate situation where you are literally not physically capable of it.
But people could come into that room.
Yeah. Well, I know nobody's in an iron lung anymore from polio. Like the last person that was in an iron lung died. But I'm talking about that level of situation.
I'm sure an iron lung person could have visitors.
I'm sure they could too.
So I know I'm being bombastic and challenging here. And I understand your situation. You're like, Joel, I can't even hear you now because you have no idea my situation. Yeah, we sent people to the moon, but you don't understand how tough this is. That might be your perspective. That might be where you're coming from or your station in life. I understand that. But I am saying that you could work toward it in an actionable way to connect with the people that you can curate. Don't just take the default of the people around you. I'm just talking about putting some effort into it. Put some calculus into it. It might take some intention, and I think that's exciting because when you get around the people that you hum at the same vibrational level at, when you're starting to get around them and you're like, wow, this is awakening parts of me that are so exciting. It's kind of like falling in love. It's similar. When you get to the right tribe, it's like falling in love almost. You're like, wow, this is incredible. I feel more like myself around these people than I do when I'm not. I love this. They're augmenting who I am, and I'm augmenting who they are. We're feeding off each other. This is an incredible supportive environment for me.
Yeah, most of the time, when people don't believe it's possible, it's based on limiting beliefs. Like I just communicated a limiting belief before. I was like, I'm in my 40s. It's hard to find friends. Totally limiting belief. I think some people feel like the limitations are financial. Some of them believe the limitations are that they're an introvert and they're not good at being around people. Some of the limitations are I'm a thinker and I'm harsh and nobody can tolerate my harshness. There's lots of different limiting beliefs, and those are usually not true limitations, but it's in the mind. And that's oftentimes what we have to overcome. And I would say that, there are people still gathering all over the world. They're gathering virtually and they're gathering in real life. And seminars, conferences, mentorships, right? We run mentorships, so I'm saying that because I know people have developed relationships in those mentorships. Our Profile Training program. I'm talking about the ones that I'm personally familiar with because I watch it happen. But I know that when people come to our Profiler Training program, there are people in there who know type inside and out, front to back. They have been studying type for over a decade, and they get to Profiler Training, and the thing that they go away with is not just the skill of turning their theory into the skill of profiling, but the community and the relationships they build, and the fact that they're able to find their tribe having gone to Profiler Training. That is becoming, I would argue, one of the most powerful secondary benefits of that program. So I know we're not the only ones who are running online programs and seminars and mentorships. I think you should come to ours because they're awesome. But also,
Amen.
Yeah, but also there are lots of opportunities out there for people to gather. And if you can find some of those opportunities, yeah, you might have to spend some money, right? If it's like a high value tribe, usually there's the entry fee is financial, right? If it is a high quality one, if it is a group of people who are dedicated to building a skill or to building, increased access to really important information or to, to anything that's really worth it, there's usually a financial barrier of entry. And I know that we ideologically say that things that are free are better, but that's just not true because there's no vetting criteria for who enters those kinds of communities. And there are tons of communities out there of people who are into type, people who are into growth. And almost always, those are great places to start to create virtual tribes. I would pitch our mentorships and our events. I think they're fantastic, and we curate an amazing group and an amazing community of people who are supportive of your personal growth journey, specifically of that. And also get where you can get, right? Find people who are into the same things that you're into, who aren't just the default, who aren't a crabs in a bucket scenario, aren't people who are weirded out by you changing and growing and transforming through the course of your life, who don't think there's something wrong with that and will tell you that there's something wrong. Be intentional about these people. And by doing that, you're also choosing people who are helping you bet on yourself, which is The paradox of becoming the best version of yourself means you have more to offer to the rest of the world. It's the selfless act of being selfish. It is the paradox. And your tribe will be people who help buoy you up to do that.
I know I'm like super intense. I'm like, go, you people got to the moon. You can find friends. Well, I think we're going to talk a little bit about why I'm like this in the next episode. We talk about massive action because I want to address this idea of how do you actually make change? And action is usually the case. It's usually not more understanding or just thinking. And we'll talk about that in the next episode. But that's what I'm encouraging you to do right now is to take massive action toward curating the tribe that's going to feed your life. And the danger, I'll just offer one more danger, is just be very clear you're not going for the dopamine hit, right? The easy dopamine hit. I know a few people who used to be associated with us in the past. They got together as a group. And as a group, they pick apart and criticize other people trying to create things in the world. They take creators, people that are business owners, creators, and coaches. They tear them down together as a group to get dopamine hits with each other. That's not the tribe I'm suggesting. They have shared interests and values. They've curated this. They were intentional about building this together. And now they're basically spending their time getting cheap dopamine hits by criticizing and tearing down others.
Oh, you were saying people we were associated with. I was like, who are you talking about? But you're actually talking about one of our associates had a website of people who their entire website was designed around tearing this person down.
That's right. And they built community around it.
They did. It was insane. They were like supporting each other through cancer treatments. And yet the entire tribe was built on destroying other human beings and undermining their work. Yeah. It was crazy.
So there's subtle ways of that. There's more intentional, like we just talked about, ways of that were very obvious. But that's obviously something you have to be measuring or taking account of. Just make sure that you're not going for cheap hits to connect with others, because connection with others is so important. We often, again, I would say that's more, you're going to think it's intentional if you curate a community like that with a focus, but it's still kind of a default because you're defaulting to the lower base energies of life, right? Yeah. You're not attuned to the things that bring joyfulness and happiness and creativity.
Yeah, try to make sure your tribe is focused on high vibration energy.
Again, you can do what you want, but I think if you want to live the best life, that's our recommendation. So, what kind of tribe are you associated with right now? What kind of tribe do you want to curate in your life? Have you accepted the default? Are you looking to curate people with like interests, values? Do you even know what your interests and values are? Have you made a list of them to know what characteristics you're looking for in others? Have you made a list of those and then compared them to tribes that are already starting to gather or people that are already interested in these things?
Are you holding yourself back based on limiting beliefs?
Yeah. What are these stories for you? We want to hear from you. You've been the third person in this conversation, but you haven't had a microphone. But we want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com directly below this episode. Leave a comment, ask a question, or share your personal story about tribes, about friendships, about your default settings, about your family. You can complain about your family if you want. I don't care.
Come to our website and complain about your family.
No. That's lower self stuff. Just come over and curate and like talk about what your experience is.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave us a rating and review on iTunes, it helps us out a lot. We have a book that's called Personality Hacker. You can get it in all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating and review on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. We have a suite of programs that are personal growth oriented through the lens of type. We have a program called Empowered. It's for INFJs and INFPs, and it helps you get over the challenges that might make you feel a little disempowered in the world. There are some fantastic interviews in there, a great group of human beings, INFJs and INFPs, that tell you their strategies, outlooks, mindsets, and the things that they did to make the most out of their lives. So head over to personalityhacker.com to look for the Empowered program. We also have a program called Unleashed for INTJs and INTPs. Same deal. Amazing group of human beings have given you some of the highest leverage pieces of advice for their personality type. And also, there is a lot of information in there about gaining social acumen, raising your emotional quotient or your EQ, and also dealing with a lack of motivation. So if that is up your alley, if those are some of the challenges you're experiencing, head over to look for the Unleashed program. My current favorite program is one that we just created this year called Tools for Emotional Survival. It walks through all the personality types and talks about how to manage stress better, how your personality type deals with stress, what self-care means to your personality type, as well as remaining optimistic in this world. You can get 1, 2, or all 3 of them in a suite. Head over to personalityhacker.com, look at our catalog, and pick up Tools for Emotional Survival as soon as possible because it's a great program.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.